Hello, 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 and welcome back. Welcome to our weekly Sunday school lesson. I am Elder Latanya Milliken of the All Nations Church in Oakland, California, and this is lesson 10 of our winter quarter. The date of the lesson is February the 6th, 2022, and we are in the book of St. John, the 18th chapter, highlighting the 15th through the 27th verse. I hope you've read your lesson this week. The subject today is trials and denial. If I can give it a title, it would be Jesus's trial and Peter's denial. Let's see where we are. Well, you know what, before we get started, I shared with you around Thanksgiving that my son and his wife, LaShawn, had a baby on the way. And so today they had their gender reveal party. And guess what? We're having a girl. So I'm celebrating wearing pink because we've got a brand new precious daughter coming into the family. So we thank God for all of his many blessings, including the celebration of life coming into the world. And so congratulations to the Breathwaites. And I can't wait and see what our darling little my precious granddaughter is going to be like. And also, I want to take this time to thank each of you for being with me on this journey, for your support, for your comments, your thoughts, your critique, your advice, all of the things. It's just your feedback. Feedback is a gift. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If I can really be transparent, I'm enjoying this. I have been teaching Sunday school for as long as I can remember. Truthfully, I don't even remember how old I was when I began teaching with those little cards. I don't know if you were around or in Sunday school at that time. You got the little picture card. The picture was this big, the scripture was this big, and the little lesson was this big. And so I taught the nursery, and I've taught every age, the adult Sunday school class. I've even been a Sunday school superintendent. And most recently, an adult Sunday school teacher at the All Nations Church. And gratefully enough, prior to COVID, honestly, I would read my Sunday school lesson on Saturday night, and then would get up Sunday morning and be in Sunday school at 9:30, and I'm not gonna call that teaching. I was discussing it because my mom, who's read the Bible several times, my dad, my late father, Pastor Felton Milliken, was in my class, and literally a few others, and it was a discussion, and so I could really rely on that discussion to kind of help me with the class, if you will, and it was amazing. But now this journey, these last it'll be 2 years, I think, in April, Mayish, that I've been teaching, has really caused me to study and do a deeper dive into the lesson. And of course, I can't share with you in 20 minutes all that I learned, but I can tell you I'm learning and I love it. And even with the master's program, I learned to use tools to read the scripture. So you learn, you understand what's happening historically, the context, what happened before, what happened after, all of these things, what's happening culturally, what's happening politically, so you can understand what were the rules like, all of these things that help you understand and put it together so you have a full knowledge of what's happening. And so with that said, our lesson today kind of helped me see behind the scenes of Jesus's trial and Peter's denial. And so let's kind of go into the lesson. We're going to read a little bit and we're going to elaborate. But let me just connect the dots. Last week, Jesus was arrested and he was taken to Ananias's house. And Peter and another disciple followed along. And that's where our lesson begins this week. It's kind of just like immediately after our last week's lesson. And the first point I want to share with you in this, as we learned, Jesus was arrested. He is now being interrogated. Okay, forgive me if I say words wrong. You all, I'm not perfect. Sometimes I get the tense wrong. Sometimes when I'll do my video and I'll view it and I'm like, oh my God, that was wrong. But I have to get it out to you. So forgive me. I'm getting better. I'm learning. I'm getting better. So with that and his trial, his torture and the crucifixion, all of these things, that legal length, there were 15 violations, Jewish and Roman violations. So when we say, or when the preachers say that Jesus understands what you've gone through, literally, he was treated indifferent. The Roman Empire was in control at that time, and the Jews were subject. They were not the ruling class at that time. And so there were the fact that Jesus, when he was arrested, did not go to jail. He went to somebody's house, lets you know. So he went to the high priest's house instead of jail. And there was so many violations. So and we hear all of these stories where unless you rich, powerful, and famous, you may not get the same treatment. And so we're learning some things here in this lesson. So let's go deep before I exhaust too much of my time. I hope you're getting the point that I'm trying to come across with. Jesus understood and he fully knew the law. He knew the canon law, which was the scripture law, and he knew the laws of the land as well. So let's go. I'm in the 18th chapter of St. John, beginning at the 15th verse, reading the way. You read your favorite translation along with me. Simon Peter followed Jesus, as did another disciple. That other disciple was acquainted with the high priest. So he was allowed to enter the high priest's courtyard with Jesus. Now, the high priest was powerful and wealthy and lived in a villa with on so many acres. Peter had to stay outside the gate. Then the disciple who knew the high priest spoke to the woman watching at the gate, and she let Peter in. The woman asked Peter, and she asked an open-ended question, which allowed Peter to give her a yes or no answer. You're not the one. You're not one of that man's disciples, are you? No, he said, I'm not. First denial. And because it was cold, the household servants and the guards had made a charcoal fire. They stood around it, warming themselves, and Peter stood with them, warming himself, because Peter didn't know anyone there. The other disciple knew the high priest. Peter didn't know anyone there. And that servant, the gatekeeper, knew that Peter was not a servant at Ananias' house, nor was he a guard or a soldier. Now we transition to what's happening with Jesus. Inside, the high priest began asking Jesus about his followers and what he had been teaching them. Jesus replied, "Everyone knows what I teach. I have preached regularly in the synagogue and in the temple where the people gather. I have not spoken in secret." I'm going to pause right here and give us some clarification. Now, so the high priest was asking Jesus, where are your followers from? He wanted background information. And why are they following you? How many are there? Were you teaching a revolution against Rome? Was your teaching a political threat? So he was asking about his disciples, okay, and he wanted to know the content of what Jesus was teaching, because they had this tradition that one must teach the law openly, in contrast to false prophets who taught in secret. So that was their tradition. So you had to teach. So Jesus was saying, I taught openly. I did the right thing. Okay, I'm not a false prophet. And so then Jesus said to ask his disciples. Everyone knows what I teach. I have preached regularly in the synagogues and in the temple where the people gather. I have not spoken in secret. Why are you asking me these questions? Ask those, this is what Jesus says, ask those who heard me. They know what I said. And the reason why Jesus said that is because to refer to public knowledge added strength to his argument. So also he was relying on an Old Testament, so in the Old Testament, when you were caught in a situation, and it was just one man against one man, it was his word against his word, and so it was not valid. It was only valid if there was a witness. Excuse me. And so Jesus is referring to, okay, I can't speak for myself because I can't bear witness of myself. There has to be a witness to validate what I'm saying. So he's telling the high priest, go to my disciples and ask them what I teach. And then that will validate what I said or what I preach or what I teach. And here's what happened next. Let's pick up. After Jesus said, ask those who heard me, they know what I said. Then one of the temple guards standing nearby slapped Jesus across his face. Is that the way to answer the high priest? He demanded. Now, what do you call that? Police brutality? Have you been there? Jesus went through it. Jesus replied in verse 23, if I said anything wrong, you must prove it. So Jesus is now telling him about the laws and the standards because he knows. But if I'm speaking the truth, why are you beating me? Verse 24, and that Ananias bound Jesus, sent him to Caiaphas, the current high priest. And so we're going to learn more about what's happening in this trial. And so we're seeing this backdoor situation with Jesus, them not following. Ananias is using his power and his wealth to circumvent the correct procedures and law procedures. We know how it is with the rich and the famous. We know how they, as we say, get away with murder, right? Okay, so let's move on. We're going to pick up with Peter. Meanwhile, as Simon Peter was standing by the fire warming himself, they asked him again, you're not the one of his disciples, are you? All these closed-ended questions. He denied it, saying, no, I'm not. But one of the households, so it gets down to where someone really recognizes Peter. Verse 26, But one of the household slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter cut off, asked, "Didn't I see you out there in the olive grove with Jesus?" Again, Peter denied it, and immediately the rooster crowed. So that's our reading. Interesting. Jesus had predicted that Peter would deny him 3 times. And after the 3rd time, and it was early in the morning, and this was an early rooster. This is a rooster who crowed about 2-3 o'clock in the morning, them early rooster crows. I remember when we were in Kampala, Uganda, staying on Daniel's compound, the roosters would crow really, really early in the morning, and sometime before daybreak. And so let's see what our lesson ends there. And I'm sure next week Jesus is sent to Pontius Pilate, the Roman procurator appointed by Caesar to oversee Judea, for questioning as the plan to execute Jesus continues. So we're going to learn more and more, and hopefully we'll be able to see some of the breaches in the proper procedure and understand how Jesus understand how Jesus experience things that we experience and can identify with it. The aim of the lesson today is to examine how Jesus is tried by the high priest while Peter denies knowing him. So that's the aim of the lesson. We've talked about that. The principle is to recognize Christ's faithfulness in a situation where men were unfaithful. So we've got the soldier that slapped Jesus, Ananias who brought him to his house instead of taking him to prison where he should have gone. All of these situations where men were unfaithful to what was correct. And we know that happens today. The application to always turn to Christ when others turn away, knowing that he is always faithful. Let me give you the conclusion of the lesson, and I'll give you what to read for next week. As we see Jesus' enemies use deceit and manipulation in order to execute their wicked plan to destroy Jesus. No one that night wanted to admit to knowing Jesus, including one of his closest friends, a man he had called on to pray with him the night before he was arrested. Where do you stand? Are you trying to blend in, or do you stand out? That's a good question. Oh my goodness, that's real. That night, the disciples ran to follow, and Peter denied him. Peter loved Jesus. But I tell you, we can't judge, because until you walk in a man's shoes, you don't understand. It was easy for Peter to say no, because the pressure that was on him, he was alone. But I'm not making no excuse for Peter, but this is a learning. And so until next week, let's find out what continues to happen to Jesus in this process. God bless you. Bye-bye.